You're listening to the Black Sheep and Bad Apples podcast.
Welcome back. I'm Loren O'Brien, and this is Black Sheep and Bad Apples, the show where we write things soberly, and we deliver them in various states of inebriation. For inebriation. Now tonight, I've got Shawn Hill, our producer, and Mr. Sam Mitchell with us here tonight.
Dr. Mr.
My cohorts, Dr. Mr.
Just Dr. Mr.
Okay. So he's got
PhD.
a new name announced here on Black Sheep and Bad Apples. So,
Yeah, I literally legally changed my name to Dr. Mr.
Unfortunate for you.
Yeah.
Very unfortunate.
The license plate's cool, though.
Yeah.
Mr. They're like, nobody's going to take you seriously. You sound like a irrigation product.
And I became a professor. So I'm now Professor Dr. Mr.
Confusing, but okay.
Yeah.
So this is going on. This is starting off well. How are you guys doing, first of all?
Brought all my bits, so I'm great.
Brought all the bits. Yeah, we've all been tested for our Rona.
Yay, Rona
We've
test.
all been
Ugh.
determined
That was
healthy.
interesting. I can't say that it was uncomfortable, but it wasn't comfortable
I would
either.
describe it as mildly uncomfortable, like a
like,
mosquito. Like a mosquito bite.
I would eventually get used to that, like something there, but only for like an hour, and then I would claw my fucking face off.
Yeah,
You know what I
fortunately this doesn't happen for an hour.
Yeah, it was only like 10 seconds or something.
I asked the nurse if she wanted to get together later, but yeah, I mean,
Apparently that's
I was like, "You're into this too?" And she was like,
What?
"I was like, oh,
Jesus Christ. So it's been a fun time. And speaking of medical stuff, you guys heard the term an apple a day keeps the doctors away?
I had heard that.
Well, we're going to be getting into that tonight.
Nice.
Because we're talking about
The
more
medical
or less the history
application.
the history of apples.
In
Not the medical
in the field of medicine. Western medicine.
I always thought it was weird that it was like an apple a day keeps the doctor away, but then when you were a little kid, you used to take the teacher an apple, and I was like, well, why are we giving the teacher apples if we're trying to keep the doctors away?
Interesting. So I guess Shawn just admitted to wanting to harm his teachers. That's fun.
Yeah, I heard it too.
Well, we're gonna actually talk a little bit about where the apple a day keeps the doctor away came from. But if we're gonna be doing the history of apples, I wanted to start off with just a little briefing about them, some personal feelings. And apples are boring.
Are you going to start off with the arsenic?
Apples aren't boring.
They're red, yellow, gold, or green, but they're all like kind of hear me out, mundane,
kind of purple too.
or passe. And like, don't get me wrong, they're also like really enjoyable. They're like handheld little sweet fruits, and
Snack pack.
Yeah, they go well with basically everything. So
Seriously, they do.
So my feeling about apples is not that that they're more of a norm and a standard in today's society, and that's because like they're neither exciting, but they're also not something to be acknowledged with indifference. Like if somebody offers you an apple piece, you're like, fuck yeah, I'll take a piece of this apple.
An apple's a solid piece of food.
Exactly.
It's a solid food item.
And I think it's kind of a standard, which is why it's kind of almost passe. And so
it's because once you plant an apple tree, it'll be there for the next like 200 years.
Yeah, pretty cool. And so as boring as the old apple is, because honestly, it just seems like
pulled an apple off my first apple off my apple tree up on the mountain. Yeah, nice little.
You guys at home
nice
can't
little
see
one.
this.
Yeah,
but we're literally looking at it.
It's a tiny little apple.
Little apple.
It's like if an apple could be a shot glass.
Yeah,
That would be. It's the perfect size apple to make a bowl out of.
Yeah.
Ooh.
And so like the reason I'm saying all this is because like as boring as the old apple is, like it's history actually touches on everything from like tyrannicide to like the god Loki, gigantic mega-fauna, the Silk Road, big tech, and the beginning steps of science. So it's like apples, like when I heard that I was being assigned apples, I was like, this seems like it might be a stretch. But it was actually really, really fun and kind of exciting. So I'm happy to get into
You're
this.
welcome.
Thank you, Sam, who couldn't.
I just didn't have time, bud.
Didn't have time to write it.
Sorry.
That's fine. It's honestly been a wild ride. So the apple is ranked as the fourth most common fruit on the planet, lagging behind tomatoes, bananas, and watermelons in that order. Throughout the centuries,
That was weird.
all right, well, go ahead
Stuff
and
keeps
cut.
getting knocked over in your fucking house for no
Yeah.
damn reason, bro.
Just go ahead and cut that out, but leave it in the original so that.
No, we're not cutting that out.
All right,
We're leaving
all
the
right.
ghost on the podcast.
So throughout the centuries, the unexciting apple has
Clearly wants to be
exploded
heard.
into 7,500 different varieties, and all of these cultivars are linked back to one particular region in Asia. Thought to have originated 8 to 11.6 million years ago, one of the original apples, Malus seversi, is still found in the southern parts of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and northwest China, and is identified as the main contributor to the genome of the domestic apple, Malus domestica. So it's pretty cool.
How many millions of years old is this piece of
And
fruit?
so I was getting conflicting information. The oldest it dates back is to about 11.6 million years ago, but the earliest I found is around 8 million years ago. So I wanted to include
So,
that.
3 million years is
It's not too much.
Not that big.
Yeah. And apples. Yeah, and apples have been eaten for a very long time, even before humans discovered them, and later domesticated them. See, most fruits produce like sweet smells, vivid colors, and glucose, and they do this for a particular reason: to be attractive and energy-packed. Most fruits and vegetables require the involvement of animals in order to disperse their seeds, so making them attractive and flavorful and full of nutrients and energy. It really goes a long way to getting your genes spread throughout, the entire world. And
No,
so
it's a pretty perfect thing it drops on the ground, something eats it, and then walks away all energized and walks some distance
as
and
far
then
as it can.
shits its seed out.
Yep.
In a little ball of fertilizer.
Yeah, and a good example of this is like the blackberries, which contrast to the apple. But the blackberry is really good at what it does because it produces a lot of these little seeds, a lot of these little fruits. And so it can be eaten from like bigger things, from like raccoons to bears, to also little birds who can go and peck at these little tiny fruits that make up the entire blackberry and get a seed. And so it's a really cool method that that blackberries have developed. But the apple hasn't quite done that. The family from which apples come, Rosaceae, contains fruits like cherries and raspberries and blackberries, and these are all small enough to be eaten, for example, by birds and stuff. And being eaten obviously has its benefits, and that's why the blackberry is so prolific, is that they're really easy to eat and very small, so a big variety of things can eat them.
The seeds. Yeah.
But again, the apple doesn't quite fit into that little system, at least not anymore. Because the apples, they require larger jaws, and those larger jaws come from bigger animals. And it's been historically noted that those kind of animals have been gone for about 10,000 years. And so the apple is kind of not really moved too much geographically.
I mean, deer eat apples.
Yeah. Well, and the reason for what we're talking about, the way the apples get processed as a seed and eaten. And so the reason for them not moving very much geographically without domestication has kind of been theorized by Robert Spengler of the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History, which is a very long name. And that's because the megafauna that once ate and dispersed these apple seeds, like something would an entire blackberry, those things have since died out.
Right, something that can just swallow down an apple, just like pick the whole thing up.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
oryx.
Yeah, and so Spengler explains it himself here. Quote, seeing that fruits are evolutionary adaptations for seed dispersal, the key to understanding fruit evolution rests in understanding what animals were eating fruits in the past. And many megafauna have gone extinct since the Miocene period, and there were like some outliers because that was a couple million years ago. These outliers were like the giant sloth, the cave bear, and like an early kangaroo called Proctodon, and it kind of looks more like a rabbit than it does a kangaroo.
Right.
It's really cool. But
it's huge.
It was huge, and
Many hundreds of pounds, or like more. I know,
You would
like a
have to
cave
look
bear was like a bus.
yeah, you would have to look that up because I'm not actually sure. But
giant
it's
sloth
called
was like a
megafauna,
bus.
so it leads me to believe that it was probably pretty big.
But it could be still classified as megafauna if it's just a gigantic version of something, but not necessarily like so big it's like the size of a house. No,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Not the size of an elephant.
Well, I also came across an argument in my research that people were like, "Are humans megafauna?" And I was like, "Oh shit, that's cool."
I don't think so.
I mean, if you think
You'd
about
have
it,
to
like
classify as a
macrocosmic,
gorilla
and
as megafauna too.
Yeah, and think about it, microcosmic and
Like gorilla's
macrocosmic,
pretty
all
mega.
that kind of. Yeah, it's just weird. But you know, apples
Don't
that have
have-
propagated by themselves, they probably would have ceased to exist, much like the avocado, which actually spread through megafauna as well. But the apple had an unlikely ally when it came to propagation. Us, the intelligent animals.
Right. Who domesticated who? The apple needed to survive. Now we have juicy, delicious apples. I feel like the ancient apple, much like an apple, if you've had an apple from an apple tree that is pruned and is very old, they're small, they're bitter, they're wormy, they're not delicious. You wouldn't want to pick one off a tree and casually walk down the lane nibbling it.
yeah.
No, it'd be
We'll get
terrible.
into those
You'd
'cause
have
there's
to
a type
cook
of-
it first
yeah.
because to break down the sugar. But not anymore.
Not anymore. We, obviously humans discovered the apple and its nutritional benefits and began to propagate it wherever we could. And it was great nutrition, it was predictably productive, and we could rely on it as a tiny little handheld sugar grenade. And so once the apple was found, we began to spread it throughout the world. And how they spread was through human involvement. And just really quick, I'd like to break away from apples to talk about how Native Americans, talk about Native Americans for a minute, because the way that we kind of spread things as Europeans is kind of, I don't know, just take a listen. I just want to take a glimpse into two things really quick. The first being how human beings have made the food we rely on so abundant that it's something we almost take for granted. And the second being the way that we currently plant this abundant food is detrimental to our environment. And it wasn't always like this. So to tell this part of the story, I'd like to discuss something called the pristine myth. The pristine myth, the landscape of the Americas in 1492.
More fun white people stuff.
Written by William M. Denevan. And it discusses the interesting idea that European settlers had, as well as like the later colonists. And the idea was that the wilderness of the Americas, like these were places that were untouched by humans. The land, it just grew wild and free, and food grew aplenty for all humans to enjoy. And what's more, it did this without any help from anyone. And also, the great thing about this is that nobody really lived there, so there was just all this food and nobody eating it.
When was the Arctic land bridge?
I think it was 15 to 20,000 years ago. It might have been 30, but it was a long time ago.
Right. So for tens of thousands of years, people came from Asia, where apples were. And now, were there apples here when Europeans showed up?
So actually, no, there wasn't. We
Right.
had the crab apple, which was smaller and not as like enjoyable
Oh,
for
yeah,
like
crab
early
apples are
colonists.
crabby.
Yeah, and then one could argue that manzanitas, which are literally
But
little
manzanita is a
apples.
stony-centered thing, isn't it? It's got more like a...
I don't know enough about it to
A
talk about
manzanita
its
berry
family.
tastes like a Boston baked
Manzanita
bean.
literally means baby apple
Yeah.
in Spanish. But I've always felt like that was just based on how those berries looked.
Yeah,
And that
because they
they were-
definitely are like. I've eaten some. They're like.
Because a manzanita
They're like a little-
flower looks completely fucking different than an apple or a cherry flower, which is
Yeah.
why apples and cherries are in the same genus or family or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
That's how we that's how we like. Just it's a flowers.
cherries-
are a big
cherries are-
distinguisher for when it comes to speciation.
Cherries are also in the family of Rosaceae, which is what the apple's a part
That's
of.
what I
So
mean. And
I don't know about the manzanita, though.
Manzanita berries aren't
I bet it's not because the flower is so different. If you look at them, they're like those weird little bell. It's like a bell and like a cluster of flowers, right? On a manzanita, coming off a branch. If you,
Yeah.
I'll look it up.
Yeah, go ahead and
I'll
look it up
find
real quick.
I'll find a photo.
So again, like these people, the colonists basically thought that this land just did this beautiful, wonderful thing. But Denovan argues that this is incorrect. Through his studies, it appears the Native Americans had a complex and simple way of modifying forests to produce more landscapes. Now, what we're not going to talk about here is how they used to burn the forests and do all that stuff for forest management and stuff. But we are going to talk a little bit about how they kind of made these more useful landscapes. And I'm going to quote from him right here. Quote, Indian modification of tropical forests is not limited to clearing and burning. So they were doing this throughout the Americas, not just North or South America. Large expanses of Latin American forests are humanized forests in which the kinds, numbers, and distributions of useful species are managed by human populations. Doubtless, this applies to the past as well. One important mechanism in forest management is manipulation of swidden fallows, which is it's called subsequent agroforestry, and this is just basically a process by which one grows food on a plot of land for less than the plot has remained fallow. And continuing his quote, manipulation of swidden fallows to increase useful species. The planting, transplanting, sparing, and protection of these useful wild fallow plants eliminates clear distinctions between field and fallow. So abandonment is a slow process, not an event. Gordon, who's another researcher that Denovan cites, describes managed regrowth vegetations in eastern Panama, which he believes extended from the Yucatan to the Columbia in pre-European times. The Huastec of eastern Mexico and the Yucatec Maya have similar forms of forest gardens or forest management. The Quiapo of the Brazilian Amazon introduce and or protect useful plants in activity areas adjacent to villages or campsites, in foraging areas along trails near villages, and in artificial forest mounds in savanna. In managed forests, both annuals and perennials are planted or transplanted, while wild fruit trees are particularly common in early successional growth. Weeding by hand was potentially more selective than indiscriminate weeding by machete. Much dispersal of edible plant seeds is unintentional via defecating and spitting out. So what the Europeans thought of they thought of this place as this untouched, unspoiled land filled with like mystery and food and resources everywhere, and it was
In fact, it was a 20,000-year-old well-tended garden.
That's exactly it. It was so fucking different. The trails that were popular, like all the
fucking exact goddamn opposite.
yeah, and they kept food closer to home because if they had to travel, so and so, like just all of their routes were aligned with food, and this was a significant advantage as it made domestic life more obtainable. So the myth of the pristine landscape brings us back to apples. As humans began to discover apples as a source of food, the Han Dynasty of China had emerged and began trading across Asian, European, and African continents through the Silk Road. European traders carried with them apples, apple cuttings, and apple seeds until hybridization and natural evolutionary processes brought us to a form of the modern apple around like 4,000 years ago. And this is also interesting because different varieties have begun like popping up everywhere and like localizing themselves. And so by introducing all these different varieties to all these new localized apples, we got this kind of diverse genome that was more hardy and strong. And so it gets back to what you were saying earlier, Sam, like, are we planting apples or something to that effect?
Are we using the apple as food, or is the apple using us to proliferate itself?
It's really interesting, especially because it seems like a very hardy plant.
Well,
and also,
look how many, 700 and some odd variety?
7,500.
Sorry,
Yeah.
7,500 some odd variety?
Yeah. And I read another number that was around like 11,500.
This is
but I think that was like cultivar.
But it's like tulips or weed, right? You know, we used to use tulip bulbs as money. Like that's how much value we put on tulips.
That's also interesting because you can't eat them.
You can 100% eat tulips.
Really?
Yeah.
Shit,
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Like tulip bulbs are definitely edible.
Oh shit.
But like the Dutch used tulip bulbs as currency for a while.
That's cool. Don't they have the biggest like tulip farms in the world now?
That's why
Yeah,
this is
that
a
makes sense.
big
Then they make
reason
currency, and they're like, "What do we do with all these tulip bulbs?" All the rich were like, "Shit."
But
Plant
still
'em.
to this day, tulips in Holland have a cultural value beyond what you would find other places. Mm-hmm. And did we do that or did the tulip do that? Is the
It's an
question.
interesting thing. It kind of it makes me think of The Happening. Do you remember that movie?
Oh God, with Mark Wahlberg,
Yeah,
where
with-
the plants are
Honestly-
killing people.
honestly,
It's the worst
I thought it-
movie ever.
I thought it was great. Honestly, it was full of suspense and it was
when
a
it
little
came out, I
cheesy.
thought it was great.
Yeah, yeah.
Now that I watch it as like an adult who's been in the world for a bit longer,
It does.
it's hard.
It does
It's hard
age
to
well
watch.
though. Like it's still hard to watch if you like.
Still
if you,
just as bad as it was
yeah,
all those years ago.
What I mean to say is, if you've seen it once, you're going to enjoy it. But if it's your first time watching it now, you're going to be like, "What the fuck is this trash?" But the point I want to get to though is that in that movie they're talking about how the plants release this pheromone. The pheromone is a thing to the brain. People start suiciding. Now, have we investigated tulips?
In what way? Yeah, I would say we
To
probably
release
have.
to release those pheromones? Like
That was a
anyway.
made-up concept.
Anyway, maybe. So the apple, it's thought to have been domesticated between like 4,000 to 10,000 years ago, and there's like a little bit of a question about that, depending upon what we consider domestication.
Well, and it was clearly domesticated one place first, and then just judging by the landscape of travel in 10,000 years ago, it's not like there was a rail line.
Yeah,
You were doing that by foot.
by foot. Yeah.
So you would have to, it would take a while for it to move out.
But if people were throwing enough apple cores into ditches and shit like that along the way, eventually they're gonna kind of migrate naturally. But apples have like a little bit of nuance when they grow. Archaeology.org notes this about their growth. Quote, apple trees reproduce poorly when fallen apples are left to rot or when second generation trees grow too close to their parents. They rely on animals, including humans, to disperse their seeds and carry out pollination. And so by carrying these apples and apple seeds across the continents, we accidentally made the apple produce better, grow stronger, and feed more people. And we would pick up these apples from underneath these trees and carry them vast distances away from their genetic parents.
If they evolved to be eaten by transient grazing megafauna, like the buffalo needed to move hundreds and hundreds of miles in herds because they would just eat everything around. So I can imagine if there's a herd of giant whatevers that eat apples, they have to keep moving.
Yeah.
But they're still only going to roam in a certain biome.
Mm-hmm. Well, and again, throughout the apple's travels, we've just made it yield better and grow and do all this stuff. And the apple has become so popular that it actually began making cameos throughout history.
Right.
So we're going to be talking a little bit about...
Grab that action Bible.
Yeah, we're going to be... to the listeners who don't get it, there's literally a book called The Action Bible. It is a comic book of the Bible.
Well,
And
it's like based off the Bible.
yeah, it's loosely based on the Bible. Very fun. But one of those cameos that I found...
Some action figure Jesus pictures in
Yeah.
there. Pretty good.
Yeah,
He looks a little like Kenny Rogers.
yeah, a little bit.
But like really lean and buff Kenny
Yeah,
Rogers.
like if he was ripped and went to the gym every day.
Right. If they had Bowflex 2,000
Boom.
years ago, that's what Jesus would have looked like.
So
I do
priming
like the Action Bible includes over 200 fast-paced narratives in chronological order, making it easy to follow the Bible's historical flow and reinforcing the build-up to its thrilling climax.
Oh, shit.
The apocalypse.
And so the listener knows that thrilling climax is a
Ragnarok.
very sexy Jesus at the end of the book with his shirt off, hanging on that cross. But one of the cameos that apples have made throughout history is going to be found in Norse mythology. Idun is a goddess in Norse mythology who's associated with apples, youth, and fertility. In Prose Edda, excuse me, which is ancient Norse literature, Idun is portrayed as the goddess of apples, and she gives these apples to the other gods to grant them eternal youth. Long story short, though, because we only have so much time, Loki was forced by a Norse giant, who later then turned into an eagle, because it's mythology, to lure Idun into the woods, where he promised her interesting apples. Weird promise.
I got some interesting apples for you, baby.
The giant, as
That's what Loki
you know, the giant, like dressed up as the eagle or whatever, kidnaps Idun and takes him to his house. Without their eternal youth apples, the gods begin to grow old and go gray, which is, you know, and that's when they realize something's afoot. And so basically, immediately, all the gods look over at Loki, who's like, "Yeah, all right,
It was me.
all right, I'll do it. I did it.
Jeez,
Sorry,
Phil.
God, if you're gonna twist my arm about it." And so he turns into a falcon, because again, mythology, and he finds it done at the giant's house alone, turns her into a nut, and then
Into a nut?
into a nut, and then brings her back
What
to
kind of-
Asgard to restore the rightful balance.
What kind of nut?
I mean, I don't know.
They didn't say.
I didn't look that hard.
I mean, turns her into a
Broad
nut.
strokes
Like
here.
he showed up and just
It was like, poof, you a
And-
nut
and,
now.
and there's more.
no. I'm
there's
thinking
more to the
like a
story where
crazy
like the
lady.
giant comes and
Just
talks.
wouldn't leave, and she was like, "Bah!"
Yeah, there's
Nutter.
a lot more to that story, but we're just gonna end that there for now, because apples also make.
Apologies to all the Vikings out there who are
yeah.
now triggered.
They're all like, you can't start the story without ending it.
Yeah.
But
Sorry, peeps.
apples make another cameo in Greece. They appear as a part of the Greek mythology. And according to this mythology, the goddess of discord, Eris, became angry when she wasn't invited to the wedding of Pelus and Thetis. As revenge, she inscribed on a golden apple the word Calliste, sometimes translated to mean "for the most beautiful one," and threw it into the wedding party. 3 goddesses just all attempted to claim the apple. Paris of Troy was appointed to arbitrate who amongst Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite would get the apple. Hera and Athena both attempted to win his favor by bribing him. Aphrodite, though, tempted him very ironically with the most beautiful woman in the world, which was Helen of Sparta. Having successfully won his favor, Aphrodite was awarded the apple, and this action kind of dominoed into kind of accidentally maybe causing the mythic Trojan War. So,
Well, okay.
this is actually where the Greeks began associating love with apples. In fact, the idea of apples symbolizing love baked itself into Greek culture to such a degree that it became sacred and associated with Aphrodite, and it became a way to declare one's love. So I want to play a little game, guys. How did you declare love in ancient Greece after this?
Gave someone an apple?
I got my apple right here.
Ooh, for me? For me?
No.
No.
Sean, do you know
For
how?
me.
Do you know how? Do you know how you
Self-love,
declared?
bitch.
Do you know how you declared love to somebody in ancient Greece?
You gave
Full frontal?
Not quite. The declaration of love was started by throwing an apple, and I quote, at somebody.
Oh, okay. Pegging them with an apple.
Peg him with an apple. Conversely, to catch an apple thrown at you was a symbolic gesture indicating the acceptance of that love.
Not much different than Washington.
An epigram from said to have been written by Plato himself says this, quote, I throw the apple at you, and if you are willing to love me, take it and share your girlhood with me. But if your thoughts are what I pray they are not, even then take it, and consider how short-lived is beauty.
So is that where the saying
Plato, you fucking scoundrel.
is that
It's so incel-y, too. He's like,
Is that-
take the apple then, and think about how your looks aren't going to last forever, bitch. Like,
well, is that where the saying "you're the apple of my eye"
Yeah, it
came
the
from?
Republic,
yeah.
right?
Because they were literally like one eye and like some lady walking on the street and pegging them with apples.
The apple of my eye.
You're the apple of my eye. It's like, because you were aiming me down
That was
with
actually
it.
an
Like,
American thing.
I just like you said this, and I had this little scene play out in my head where like the douchey like incel kind of guy is like walking around. He's
throwing
got like
apples.
he's got like an apple, and he's looking for like the young hot teenage chick,
yeah.
right? Because this is Greece, like
Oh yeah,
man, like
high school is like 7th
we're
grade.
not we won't get into the morality of it, but like just see this dude like hey to like some chick, and like she turns and he throws the apple like real quick, and you
And
like you know like
instinctually catch
your
it.
instinct is to like catch something, or you know, that's flying at you in that way. In like she catches, he's like, oh yeah, you like me, you know, and it's just like this creepy weird.
Let me buy you a mead.
Like, oh, fucking apple throwing.
Actually,
I'm going to throw an apple at my
It'd be a
girlfriend like
cider.
the next time I see her. I'm just going to be
Jesus
like,
Christ.
hey.
you
She's
should.
like, what the hell was that? I'm
One of-
like,
You
that's
don't-
right.
And then you
Sam.
can be like, yeah, I see you don't love me.
Sam,
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
you or I need to warn her. But anyway, the next place that apples
Oh,
make
I'm
a
not
cameo
gonna do
in
anything of that sort.
is the Garden of Eden.
Yes.
So Christian
The
historians,
most famous apple.
Yeah.
The evil apple.
the evil apple. Christian historians
How
have
you know
long looked at
Christianity's kind of fucked. They're like, they made the apple
the apple a bad thing.
the bad thing. Right?
Well, and you know, Christian historians have long looked at the book of Genesis to understand where we came from in that regard. And we know the book of Genesis describes Adam and Eve as having eaten the apple from the Garden of Eden. However, the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden perhaps wasn't an apple at all. It is, however, the most popular version of the tale of the Garden of Eden, but it's difficult to pin down because
it might have been a pomegranate.
well, no, it's difficult to pin down because of how the Latin words were written at the time.
I heard it could have been a mushroom.
Well, so malum, M-A-L-U-M, the Latin word for an apple, a singular apple, is the term for which we get the apple's family name, Malus. However, malum was spelled exactly the same way as another word, malum, which is M-A-L-U-M, which meant an evil. These words are the exact same, however, they have different accents on the exact same letter, which is the A. And so it is difficult for historians to accurately pin down if Adam and Eve ate from the tree of evil or from the apple tree, or as the Bible describes, the tree of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, from Genesis 2:15-18. Quote, the Lord God took man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. I'd like to note that one too, and take care of it. And the Lord God commanded the man, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die. So,
Which was a fucking lie.
yeah.
Don't get me started. Okay.
Well, actually, I don't think it was a lie, because I think they were immortal, technically, inside the Garden of Eden. But don't quote me on it. I'm not a Bible historian.
It's like the same thing I tell a maid. I'd be like, hey, you can clean the whole house, every room, do what you need to do and stuff. Just do not go in that room, or it will kill you.
It's our poison room.
You say that to.
You have a maid?
Yeah. Wait.
Wait. Hold
Back
on.
it up.
We gotta, yeah.
You got a maid? How much does that cost?
You're asking about
Does
the
she clean
maid.
cars?
You're not even asking
live in
about
my
the
car.
locked door in the place that has only one entrance door.
So,
I've seen
no,
your
hold on.
place.
I think what we need to do is actually have this conversation off the mic, because it sounds like
No,
there
no,
could
no,
be.
no, 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 no. We gotta get this on the record.
No, but we are going to take a short little break to finish this conversation. Once we are done having it, we will be back. For now, enjoy these tasty and wonderful commercials.
So good.
This episode was brought to you by snakes. Pray with them, love them, cuddly, release them into your yard as pest control. Piss off your neighbors, put them in your teacher's desk drawer. Snakes. Their limitations are equal to their amount of legs. Snakes. Just in time for the holiday season, the Fauci Elf by Health on a Shelf is an adorable addition to your seasonal decor. His smiling face waits to greet your family members staying over for the festive season. Unlike years gone by, health and wellness is of the utmost concern, and as such, the Fauci Elf is here to help.
'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house, Fauci Elf was here, as quiet as a mouse. to test your aunt, your uncle, and grandmother too, to make sure that no one gets an additional flu. When the house has all settled for their long winter nap, Fauci Elf has science and a jingly hat. One swab at a time, no nose he will spare. With health on a shelf, they'll know that you care.
The Fauci Elf.
Hello. We'd like all citizens of our great nation to consider getting a laser-guided orbital defense lasso cannon. We, your generous supervisors, are now willing to offer big discounts on cannons between the 19-inch variable detonation to the new 46-inch cluster launch. It's always been the American dream to own one of these bad boys with the incipient space mine invasion. Our losses are your gains. God Emperor Justin Bieber has issued an executive order to offer tax write-offs and subsidies to keep these sky snakes flying through the atmosphere, effectively giving you, the American patriot consumer, a steep discount. So order from your local district commissary laser-guided orbital defense lasso cannon. Let freedom ring.
So we're back.
Hey.
And really quickly, we're going to talk more about apples.
It's a wild 3 minutes.
It was a wild 3 minutes.
Whirlwind.
Just
That almost didn't come out right.
What are the breaks? 3 minutes now?
I'm sorry?
I said, are the breaks 3 minutes now?
The breaks are 3 minutes.
Oh, okay.
That's all the time that's elapsed since we last were recording.
It's actually
just 3
just
minutes.
3 minutes. That's not as long as a commercial break will be, but I digress. So we're going to talk a little bit about grafting apples. It was about 4,000 years ago when the extant form of apples, domestic apples rather, started appearing in the Near East and spread throughout Europe, as I've described. And it was about 3,000 years ago that civilization discovered grafting. Now we're going to cite the incredibly excitingly titled The History of Grafting. Grafting, thank you.
Grafting's totally different.
Yeah, it is.
History of writing little squares by making long
That's
lines.
the history of graph paper.
So anyway, the history of grafting
Parabola.
is a scholarly article, and it's going to kind of help us define what grafting is for our listeners. Quote, grafting can be defined as the natural or deliberate fusion of plant parts so that vascular communities is established between them, and the resulting genetically composite organism functions as a single plant. Two adjacent intact plants or different branches of the same plant can become naturally or intentionally grafted together. Deliberate grafting involves inserting a previously cut shoot into an opening in another plant growing on its own root system. So grafting is a very interesting way of propagating apples, and it's actually extremely necessary in order to maintain certain varieties of trees. And it is necessary because, as noted by the article in the University of Hampshire Cooperative Extension...
Hampshire,
as quoted by them, quote, fruit trees don't come true to seed. Seeds from a Macintosh apple won't grow into Macintosh trees, and cuttings don't root easily. So it's important to note that grafting only works with plants that exist within that same species, and that's, a generalization, but especially with apples. And so we're going to quote again from the University of Hampshire here. Quote, remember that you are almost always limited to grafting within a species. Most apple varieties are compatible with each other as are most pears, but you cannot graft an apple scion on a pear rootstock or vice versa.
right?
So it's just a little bit about grafting. I thought it was particularly interesting, especially because it's the main way that we propagate most apple trees now.
The apple tree that I got this little apple off of is a 4-way apple tree. It's got 4
Right.
different types of apple
Right.
trees grafted together.
And I've seen they do the same with citrus, where you can have it's like an orange, a lime, a key lime, and a lemon, all on the one
all on the
citrus,
same
all on one trunk, and it's just been grafted to an orange tree or whatever.
Yeah, those are really cool, and I forget what I think they're called salad trees or something like that. But they're really interesting. I heard of one that had like 11 different things on it.
I believe it. I
Yeah.
bet in the nut family you could even easier get
I think it
there.
was citrus, but
With grafting, I thought was interesting. Something you pointed out to me was down in the Chico Orland area where all the almond trees are. A lot
Right.
of those were grafted on the top of
Every single one of them.
I believe a peach tree.
a peach tree. Yeah, and I
to
could
sweeten them.
I remember you saying though it was partially too because the root of what they were planting there, the actual
But almonds
base
and
of the
peaches are-
tree is the root structure itself adapts to the terrain and is more thriving than the natural root system
Yeah.
of a almond tree. So they kind of like they plant, let's say, those peach trees, cut them off, and then graft an almond tree on the top of it. And that's what I thought was really interesting. I could really identify that pretty quickly when I looked at the tree. I was like, "What's up with the base of it, though?" Because it would kind of it was bigger than the rest of the trunk of the tree.
And you were like, why do the barks look different too?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
And that's
Right.
the reason for it.
There's that weird burl line
Yeah,
where
and-
the two graft together.
And I do want to address real quick that they actually do exist within the same family. At least I'm pretty
They
certain.
have to.
Because, yeah, they have to. But if you look at, like, the almond itself. And
An
the,
almond looks
well,
like the pit
hold
of
on.
a
Yeah, I was gonna say
peach.
if you've ever seen one that's not in a bag from the grocery store, it's got a shell on it that looks exactly like the pit of a peach that you have to peel in order to get the actual almond. So
And if you open the pit of a peach like you would I remember we used to get almonds that still had the shell on them. You know what I mean? And you had to crack it off, but it was this weird porous thing.
Wait, does California grow peaches too?
I don't think so. We probably do, but
What?
I know we grow kiwis up plenty.
We just cut them off and grow almonds on them.
Well, so
Like, thanks, Georgia.
so when it was actually in the Chico area, I was like driving through. I think we were in like a rental car or a car we couldn't smoke, and we had stopped at like an almond orchard on the side of the road. And like I was like, let's grab some almonds, whatever.
Were
Let's
they in
check
the
them out.
rows?
I mean, it was just it was an almond orchard. So it was just like row after row of these almond
Well,
trees.
the
and I
question-
grabbed some almonds, and when I was taking them apart looking for the center that you can eat, I realized the thing was a peach without sweet flesh on the outside.
That's on like.
It's exactly a peach.
Yeah.
Is that just like a weird like West Coast like you got peaches and we're like, what's up with all this stupid flesh on the outside? This weird fruit. Why don't we just get to the center?
This
and call it
almond
good?
is terrible. It's all sticky on the outside.
And it's all sweet. What the hell? Well, and the interesting thing about that
I
too
hate
is
this.
that
My hands are sticky.
again, if you've ever grown up in a orchard community like I did, you can note that on the outside of the olive or the,
Actually, I
the
think we all
almonds,
did.
yeah, on the outside of the almonds before they actually shed this, they've got this little soft, fuzzy, peachy little shell on them.
Peach fuzz.
We just
fuzz, baby.
we just did some like
Deep dives.
GMO, and instead of making like seedless watermelons, we made peachless peaches.
Yeah. Almonds. The
Cool.
peachless peach.
Well, we're gonna get back into apples because almonds and peaches, fuck them for this episode.
I mean, me and Sean are both from apple places. Cool.
Yep. We're actually having a knife fight about it after this podcast.
Super dismissive.
Who's
Cool.
more appley?
So the Swiss have a
Not the fucking Swiss, dude. Sorry.
the script. I'm reading from the script. The Swiss have a folk hero about whom we've all heard. But their folk hero goes to another fucking level. Their folk hero seems to be the reason for the sovereignty of Switzerland. Wilhelm Tell, who we know as William Tell, was sort of their version of Robin Hood. It's claimed that in the early 1400s, Wilhelm Tell, we're just going to call him William,
Old Will.
who was William,
Wilhelm.
who was an expert with the crossbow, assassinated Ulbricht Gessler, who is described as a tyrant. The story goes a little something like this.
Sorry.
See, the person who would a half-century later became known as William Tell was from the province, and these provinces are called a canton, of Uri, which would later become a part of Switzerland. He and his son had made their way into their home of Altdorf, which is basically the only town in the canton of Uri. And in that town, they saw these foreign agents from different lands, from the region of Habsburg in the town square of Altdorf. Bailiff Gessler had taken a Habsburg hat and placed it on a pole nearby. So Bailiff Gessler has this this posse of dudes with him, and he's like coming to kind of patrol the town, from what I gather. And so he puts his hat on this pole, and with a blare of trumpets, he announces to everybody that if they pass by, they must uncover their head before the hat. And so from what I can tell, this was, again, Gessler trying to assert the Habsburgs Duke's dominion over the area. But it was also kind of a call for fealty.
Right, a show of fealty.
Yeah. And so William...
And subservient.
Yeah.
It's like this ridiculous, like you have to tip your hat to just a hat on a pole.
To just a hat on a pole, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so William Tell,
How
however...
insulting.
William Tell wasn't taking any foreigners' fucking shit in his own land, though, and refused to take his hat off.
Swine.
He was then dragged before Gessler, who told William Tell that if he failed to shoot an apple off of his own son's head at 120 paces, Gessler would have Tell and his son put to death. And I'm going to let Smithsonian Mag take the reins here.
You either kill your kid or I'm going to kill you both. Wait,
Like
what?
this.
I'll give you one shot.
Yeah.
True tyrant shit. It's like Xerxes level.
For real. And so again, from Smithsonian Mag, quote, Tell paced off the distance, loaded and aimed his crossbow, shot his arrow, and the apple fell. Your son is now safe, Gessler said to him, but kindly tell me why I saw you putting a second arrow inside your jacket. If my first arrow had killed my son, Tell answered, I would have shot the second at you, and I would have not missed. And so, as you can imagine, this pissed Gessler off immensely, and he ordered Tell to be bound and just dragged and taken to Lake Lucerne and thrown into a boat to be just taken across the lake to go to the castle dungeon. And during all this, Gessler told Tell that in this castle dungeon, quote, he would never more see sun or moon. So, according to the legend, Gessler, his men, and Tell boarded the boat to take Tell away. The waters of Lucerne were treacherous. I think there was a storm, but it's like really hard to pin down because it's from, around the 1100s or so. But the waters of Lucerne were really choppy, and the wind was violent and just super difficult. Having, for some reason, been released from his bonds, Tell was the only person on board with enough strength to bring it to shore. So he steered the ship towards the shore, where he, quote, leapt ashore, and with a mighty quick kick, sent Gessler and his crew back into the waves. So it's pretty cool.
Where they were
Save
so
us.
inept that they couldn't row a kick's distance back to shore.
Like, save us, Tell, and he's like, I gotcha. They're like, thank you so much. He's like, psych!
Fuck you guys! Peace!
So,
Jackasses!
that's the official version of what happened. I have the unofficial version of what happened.
There's still more.
He actually shot his kid in the face.
He shot no. So when he got on the boat, what was little known was that he was actually a time traveler. And,
Oh shit!
Right, and he had like this super futuristic watch. So he like cut the ropes with the
laser
watch
beam.
with the laser.
Yeah.
And quickly dispatched those guys, threw them overboard, rowed to shore, and pushed the boat away.
See, there's
got to tell his own version, but
I was gonna say because
I know things.
there's a lot of folklore here, and there's a lot of myths that are going on. So, Sean,
It's
did you have
good that we
something you
got to
wanted
the
to
bottom
add
of, like,
before I
the truth.
continue with this?
I was just going to ask if you just, like, reinvented a 007 in your summary.
No, but there was a slight bit of
It was-
influence I can see.
Yeah, you took a thread from their cloth.
The laser watch, I'm
Yeah.
not sure if that's entirely 007 because
know.
it really exists
And
in
it
the
happened
future.
way back then in the 1100s.
Where do you
so-
think 007 got it,
It really exists in the future,
So-
Sam?
Yeah,
So
obviously.
at
Who's
the
the time
at the point at which William Tell departed the boat, the place at which he had departed the boat has now been called Teleplat, or Tell's Ledge, and it is a noteworthy flat rock that tourists flock to in Switzerland so that they might get a glance at the place where Tell found his alleged freedom. Again, from Smithsonian Magazine here. Quote, calculating that men would somehow reach shore, Tell made his way 20 miles through dark forest and over mountain passes to Holgas, which is Narrow Pass, a sunken road leading to Kusnacht. There he hid behind a tree, waited for Gessler, and shot him dead with that famous second arrow. Finally,
Which he still had on him.
apparently
Oh,
he
wait.
still had on
The
him.
Wait.
amount of ineptitude by this guy and his men, like with 4 or 5 dudes, right? And they didn't take he knew he had the arrow because
That's probably how he
about
escaped
it.
bonds.
Ooh, yeah.
We found it.
It was a fucking laser watch. He's a time traveler. Those are the facts. Okay, don't be sheep, dude.
Laser arrow.
You guys, Don't be fucking sheep.
Laser arrow.
Okay, I'll believe laser arrow.
All right. So finally, modern pilgrims returned. We're still quoting Smithsonian. Finally, modern pilgrims returned to the lake to a bank on the shore opposite Tell's ledge. Here, after killing Gessler, Tell met in a forest meadow known today as Rutli, with 3 other men from neighboring cantons who had been wronged by the bailiff or by other hired hands of the Habsburgs.
That's pretty convenient. Like those dudes just showed up.
Yeah.
No, this was a little bit later. This is
Some days.
Some days they're having a meeting about this now. So the 4 of them swore an oath, which Swiss boys know by heart, and I'm quoting it here. Quote, to assist each other with aid and every counsel and every favor, with person and goods, with might and main, against one and all who may inflict on them any violence, molestation, or injury, or may plot any evil against their persons or goods. The orders were given for the mountaintop bonfires, signals to be lit to start the war of the national liberation and the destruction of the castles like Gessler's, built by the Austrians to awe the natives. So, according to legend, William Tell
Sparked the revolution.
revolution, yeah.
That threw the Austrians out of Switzerland.
Weird.
Yeah.
The one thing I've
Not a hard thing to do. I mean, look how hard. Like the Russians tried
But
to
they
throw
never-
the Afghanis out of mountains like that,
Yeah,
and
I
they
feel-
couldn't.
But also,
I feel
the
like-
Swiss had never come together before here. So this is a really pivotal moment, according to the legend.
Well, and I feel like too, like maybe there was some influence in what that quote was there. What'd you say it was that everybody knows by heart?
Oh, the Swiss boy, the oath that all the Swiss
the
boys
oath,
know.
yeah, the oath that all the Swiss boys know and stuff. It was like, it sounds like there might have been some weird shit on the boat that happened in that little moment where, because you were like, that anybody that brings violence, molestation, or injury. It's
This
like
isn't on
anybody
the
that tries
boat.
to hurt us or have sex with us or try and hurt us.
Well,
And it's like, wait, what happened on that boat for a little
so
bit?
I want to address 2
Guys,
things
like,
real quick.
yeah,
Yeah,
he tried to hurt me.
Molestation has a.
It meant
had a
something different.
Yeah, it had a
it meant
different
to
meaning.
perturb or to disturb somebody
Oh,
in their
okay.
in their own. And the second thing
Touching
is that
somebody like that wasn't considered like.
I was just like, what
illegal.
happened on the boat
and the
with
second
Tell?
thing I'd like to note is that like they weren't on the boat at this point. This was like many.
No,
This was like many days after the
No,
boat.
and that's what I mean. Is like
What happened on the boat?
Tell was on the boat. Then he got
Oh,
away.
I
He
see
killed
what
the
you're
guy,
saying.
and then he met the Swiss in the field or whatever days later. And he's like, you know what? Anybody that tries to hurt us or have sex with us or hurt us,
Well,
and they're like, wait, what?
That kind of thing happened on the Jenkins's ear episode where there was a quote that one of the other people on Jenkins's boat was noted as saying, and it was something like, and then the other captain used him in a very unheard of
Molested him in like an
no.
unholy manner.
Yeah,
or
it was like,
something
no,
that.
used him in some sort of manner or whatever, and then cut his ear off, which I skipped over deliberately to see if you guys would catch because I think it might have been something like
that's
that.
I'm just like,
But anyway, we're gonna end our story about William Tell with this again from Smithsonian Mag.
Don't understand how this applies to apples.
Quote William Tell, who because it's about the apples, bro.
the famous William Tell story.
Famous William
Shut
Tell.
that.
Anyway, quote William Tell,
That's
who
it.
with one
Just the apple.
shot of his crossbow started centuries-long series of events that turned into a few isolated settlements of poor, backwards medieval mountaineers into the prosperous modern nation of Switzerland.
Did you just say they were backwards?
That's what these people said.
Okay.
From the Smithsonian Mag. And again, this was in the 1100s. And the reason I brought it in is because
That's
we hear
how
about
the
all these
apple
different people
contributed
from
to the modern
society.
civilization.
Well, and we hear about all these different people in society who have had these little cameos with the apple. And what I think is important is to note that this thing is fucking everywhere.
Always.
It's
the
always there.
Ubiquitous apple.
Yeah, and
Right.
again, it's important to note that basically the freedom of Switzerland is really noted in one. Yeah, is really rooted in one fucking apple, and I think that's really cool. It's really kind of a
No pun intended.
yeah, no pun intended. And so whether or not he was a real person is kind of been debated, but the idea of William Tell and that single apple have lived on in the hearts of minds of the people of the Swiss people as a symbol of freedom, rebellion, and sovereignty. So now, since I really like to tell tales of the high seas and shipwrecks and old nautical endeavors, You guys have heard me discuss many times about how these seamen would bring beer, wine, and rum with them in order to have clean access to liquids. Fermentation helped eliminate disease and allowed sailors, seamen, and traders to have a drink of something without getting sick. So when the Romans first sailed into the
Unless
British...
you drink too much.
Unless you drink too much, yeah. So when the Romans first sailed into the British Isles in 55 BCE, the Brits had found that the Brits that they had found there were drinking a version of apple cider. The Romans quickly fell head over heels for this new, sweet, alcoholic drink. And upon their return, apple cider spread throughout the Roman Empire. And it became such a popular drink that it eventually made its way even over to like the Germanic tribes and the Normans, who were Germany and France basically at the time. And
Well, yeah, it would have to go through there to get back to Rome anyway.
yeah, and so depending
I guess
upon
not if you're sailing.
not if you're sailing, yeah. And a lot of this was nautical stuff, I presume. Depending upon which source you cite, the Normans' conquest of England happened either in the 9th century or if we're listening to the Smithsonian in 1066 AD. Or 9th century if we're listening to the Smithsonian, or 1066 AD if we're listening to history.com. But it doesn't really matter because both note that the invasion of England by the Normans, quote, brought apple orchards and the very word cider into the English language. So the invasion of the Normans also brought with them new varieties of apples, and since genetic diversity is important to the immune system of the organism, the cultural exchange also had benefited both the people and the apples as they had become more hardy from breeding.
It's wild to think that, because at this point, the apple's everywhere. It's not like Rome doesn't have apples. They've got apples. Apples came from China through Greece to Rome, but also all the way to the Celts and the British Isles and up to the Norse in like the fucking places where it's dark all day long sometimes. You know what I mean? They still had apples. That's how hardy the fucking apple tree is.
Well, they grew up in Kazakhstan, or the apples, they were born in Kazakhstan.
And high in
like,
the mountains,
Jesus
too, if
Christ.
I remember. Because I remember watching something, it might have been like Travel Channel, I don't know what it was, something on TV that talked about where apples came from. So I kind of knew that, and I remember them being from the mountains. But my point is, it's kind of wild to think that with apples having been everywhere, apples that ferment on the fucking ground, if it's like somewhere kind of cold, a little cold, but not super cold, like the apples fall and they'll ferment.
Yeah.
You'll see deer get drunk off of apples.
Cool studies about that, actually, yeah.
Right. But it wasn't until the Romans got to Britain that
they were like, we don't have to make bread water?
The Brits had been doing this forever, but nobody else had figured it out. Nowhere else in the world was anybody drinking cider.
Well, there's
in that way.
Yeah. Well, and I think what they're talking...
cider.
Yeah, they're just talking about how, these guys had made, like, hard cider, and it wasn't just, like, juice anymore, from what I understand. And so as cider had kind of taken a hold across Europe, and apples that made it were about to get... They were about to get a very, very long and arduous journey across the ocean. The very first apples to appear in the New World would be planted in Jamestown, Virginia in 1607. These apples, however, weren't for eating. They were specifically for cider. As noted earlier, drinking water was much more dangerous back then, especially because they had no idea what made them sick at all. They just knew that it was probably from the water. So they also knew that they didn't get as sick when they, hydrated using cider or beer or rum or something like that.
All these things that were boiled as part of their process.
And they were just like, I don't
Early forms of
understand.
pasteurization.
Yeah.
Type of deal.
And so, in fact, for sanitation,
Boil that shit.
Right.
For sanitation reasons, fermented apple cider was often used with meals instead of water. And History.com notes that even children received a diluted cider with their meals. And this also makes sense because
wine in Europe, even to this day, they do that.
And also, it doesn't take that much to get a kid drunk. So I get it. Like
if you go to
little bits at a time.
If you go
do those older yeasts, like they didn't make. We now have yeasts in brewing that can withstand a higher level of alcohol in the brew. That's why we can brew a beer that's got 6.5%. But like naturally occurring yeast that you would find on like the outside of an apple, right? Doesn't make a potent brew.
Yeah. Also, I was wondering, like, if they're diluting their ciders, are they diluting it with water? And are they just assuming that it's cleaning the water? I don't know. Just when I thought about little kids drinking, like, hard apple cider, I was like, huh. Different times.
Different times.
Different times.
Drunk babies.
So, yeah, because, like, people up until, like, the 80s, probably even still now, actually, but they were given, like, they'd stick their finger into a whiskey bottle and thumb it on their teething babies' mouths.
Sure.
So,
I still do that.
you don't have babies. Most colonists grew their own apples, and so they often had
Other
them.
people do.
They grew.
I still dip my thumb in whiskey and teeth other people's.
Here you go. Hey, is your
Teething.
kid teething? Out
That's-
come the flask.
That's why you have to keep Sean away from your children.
Right.
Yeah, he will get them drunk, and they will throw up.
Welsh. Can't do nothing with them.
And so again, most colonists during this time grew their own apples, so they often had them at home, and they grew a specific variety of apples that have been dubbed spitters. Amy Stewart wrote a book called The Drunken Botanist, The Plants That Create the World's Great Drinks, where she describes spitter apples as, quote, the apple best suited for cider and brandy is what we would call a spitter, a fruit so bitter and tannic that one's first instinct is to spit it out and look around for something sweet to coat the tongue. A root beer, a cupcake, anything. Imagine biting into a soft green walnut, an unripened persimmon, or a handful of pencil shavings. That's a spitter at its worst.
A handful of pencil shavings doesn't sound bitter. It just sounds terrible.
Unpleasant.
Terrible. You're
Yeah.
like,
Well, and
for
apples
sure.
are like 80% water too. Like it wouldn't be like it'd be like wet pencil shavings. Admittedly.
Well, but I've fucking for
Maybe
sure.
early forms of pencils that
I've
were
for
like,
sure bitten into like apples where you're like, oh man, they're almost ready, and
Yep.
you think they're ready, and you grab one and you bite into it, and you're like, and it like your mouth dries out or feels like it's drying out from the bitterness. You know
yeah.
what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
like, fuck.
that. Oh, that
For
used
sure.
To, that used
Well,
to
and
be
it's got
the-
that really sour taste too. So like, I mean,
That used to be the thing on the way home. Growing up in Washington, I worked in town and lived in the country, and I just drive through the orchard roads and
Hell
stuff.
yeah. Get
Like
them
on the way
green
home, take
apples.
the back way home. You know, it was like a lot more scenic and better than just driving through streets. But on the way home was all the apple orchards and stuff. So I would just, as I was going along, I'd look at the apples and I'm like, that looks like it might be close. And I'd pull over real quick, grab an apple and take a bite of it. And it was either like not time to pick the apples or it was time to pick the apples. You know?
Well, and I grew up in New York. That literally a 5-minute walk down the mountain from my dad's house is a small little orchard. Used to have a lot more apples, but at some point,
Yeah.
it stopped being a. I don't know what they do with it, but the people are retired. They don't run the orchard anymore, and it's really small for like, especially compared to like I've been to Yakima. I've seen those orchards. They're huge. It's the same as like the almond groves in Chico, or like the big industrial orchards of New York. I mean, New York, the Big Apple.
Yeah.
It was apples were those spitter apples were New York's like #1 export, like things made from spitter apples for a long time.
yeah.
And hops, and it's funny because that's Yakima.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
me and you grew up in. You just it's newer. And more more industrial agricultural, whereas like in New York, like in my town, Indian Ladder Farms, it's been there for like 100-something years or some shit like that. You know what I mean? Like,
Speaking of 100-something years,
yeah.
although you may not recognize the name, John Chapman was a very important pioneer. Born September 26, 1774, Chapman would later become a venerable mythic saint in American folklore. In Savannah, Ohio, there is one restaurant, a tiny park, and one other thing. A gnarled apple tree that is certified as the last survivor of the thousands planted by Johnny Appleseed more than 150 years ago.
Right.
And on that note, we are going to jump into a little break, but we will be back with
Break
talking about who John Chapman or Johnny Appleseed was, and
Good guy.
and we're gonna see what he was all
Good guy.
about. Yeah. So
Break.
break.
Do-do-do.
That was a good break, right?
I'm on top of it.
Break. Are we broke?
Break.
We might be
broken.
broke.
It's broken.
Broken.
Oh, you gotta fucking Sean. Click
Sean,
the button.
The button. Thing. This episode was brought to you by apples. Apples, good for eating, good for squeezing. Apples are good for declaring your love or starting a revolution. They prevent scurvy. Apples have dominated the world. Apples, stabilizing agrarian societies for 10,000 years. Are we growing them or are they growing us? Apples!
You're back with QVC Radio. We've got a great new product for you. We're talking to Stephen Corral.
Hey, y'all. Are you all tired of digging with your handheld shovels? Well, I'm Slippery Steve, and these are Slippery Steve's steel-toed shovel shoes, a tough shovel for your steel foot. I designed them, I use them, and I sleep next to them. They come in both, left foots and right foots.
So, Slippery Steve, how did you come up with the idea?
Well, you see, there's a funny story there. Wait, I broke my foot in '82. That's where it all started. And I was having a hard time walking. See, so one day I devised a plank with some strings on my foot, and it felt so good that I went into my garden and I started digging up my prize-winning turnips, big as gophers they are, and I got the plank stuck in the dirt, and that's how the idea struck me like the wrath of Jesus.
Wow, that's amazing. So tell us a little bit about how it works.
Well, you see, you take your shoes and socks off like this, and sorry, and you undo the 27 clasps along the boot, and you seal yourself in the Kevlar ballistic laces, and the lead-lined clasps will seal the shoe securely to your foot. It's as simple as one. Use the instruction manual to strap them suckers on your feet. And 2, you're done. You're done now. You just start kicking the absolute shit out of the dirt. It's all organic, pesticide-free, and fair trade.
Fascinating. I might get some for my garden.
You should.
And where can folks find your product?
Well, okay, I got my conversion van parked out there on Cromwell and 16th next to Tammy's Adult Novelty Shop for now. And you can find me in that abandoned parking lot across the street. Or you can order it. You can call and order in, on a phone line, 555-0900. Yeah, during the day, preferably before 6 p.m. and after 5 p.m. Busy. The dark web, or you can email me at Slippery Steve Steel-Toed Shovel Shoes at darkweb.net. Also, you could just go on the dark web and just look for Slippery Steve, but that's a different emporium entirely. For a limited time, I'm bringing back my original design, the classic 82s in steel.
And where can you ship your product?
No, no, ma'am. No, ma'am.
That's close.
I don't use the quote-unquote mail system, okay? You gotta come pick it up. It's only pickup, okay? I don't mail. And bring a pickup truck. Sometimes orders can be heavy, but no, ma'am, I don't mail. I don't trust the mail since they stole my license and they couldn't even prove that I was drinking, okay?
You're still too close.
Oh, okay. I was on my own property, though, ma'am. And hell, killing gophers ain't illegal yet. I don't like pants. And I don't deliver, and I don't use the mail. So call first, so I can put on pants, okay? So I'll see you at the van, yeah? And remember, Slippery Steve's Steel-Toed Shovel Shoes, the classic 82s. Gotta run, y'all. Catch you later.
Well, okay. Up next, the full line of Risky products, including the new Risky onion peeler. Was that my finger or the onion? Who knows? It's risky.
I want to say, Sean,
We're
Yes.
back.
we're back. Nice Christmas tree.
It is a
Thank
really
you.
nice
Yeah,
Christmas
he was trying to give me guff right before the break. You guys didn't get to hear that, which is what makes it more fun.
Wild 3 minutes.
I thought it accented and added a nice festive mood to the podcast room.
It's very festive in the podcast room. Anyway, so what I want to talk about now is what I knew about Johnny Appleseed. And I learned about it when I was like 8 or so, and I'm sure you guys have kind of a similar understanding of it. But just to lay down
That
what we know.
Americana folklore
Yeah.
that every child knows to some degree.
Yeah, and so like summarized, I think it's easy to say that he was like
dude
just
on
some
a
kid
horse.
who loved apples and thought everybody should enjoy them.
Dude
and he
who
proceeded to
threw
like
apple seeds out everywhere.
he proceeded to collect seeds, just throw them everywhere. And I absolutely have no idea where this part of my mythic folklore knowledge of him comes from. But I personally remember a local legend being that Johnny Appleseed grew trees here in California. And I've got absolutely nothing to back that up, but it is a...
I feel like every single version of Johnny Appleseed is like, and he came through Louisiana, and that's why that apple tree is in Miss Mabel's yard.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But in fact, it was really just like upstate New York and Pennsylvania.
When it could have been apples from
in
the tree.
Washington. That's I'm like. Apparently, he did really well in some states and really bad in some others.
Well-
and I can get as far as weather goes, like North Dakota probably ain't gonna grow apples that well, or northern Michigan, or Michigan for that matter and stuff. But like
Anywhere that trees don't grow well, apples don't grow well.
Well, and an interesting thing to note,
but I'm
too,
like California was like we can grow trees, fuck apples.
an interesting thing to note too is that like he actually only stayed within like the New England states, and then eventually made his way over to like Ohio and did a little bit of traveling, but he actually never made his way really far west. He really focused on specific things, and I'm going to talk about why he did that here in a moment. So having said that,
because he didn't really like Washington,
well,
and it wasn't a state yet.
so having said what we all kind of thought Chapman was, I
Tracy
want to
Chapman?
talk about what we thought he was. Johnny Chapman. Johnny Appleseed.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
So having kind of talked about what we thought he was, let's talk about actually what he was. So he was born to a Nathaniel and an Elizabeth Simmons. Nathaniel Chapman and Elizabeth Simmons. Johnny grew up as the second of 3 kids. According to some sources, his mother passed, giving birth to Nathaniel Jr. Nathaniel Sr. Remarried a few years later, having 10 children with a Lucy Cooley. And there's not like
Lucy, indeed.
yeah, there's not
Cooley.
like a whole lot
There's
more.
a pun in there about birthing that I'm not gonna.
Yeah, and so
expound
he's 10 step
Appleseed.
on. Apple seeds.
apple seeds. Yeah. And so there's not really a whole lot more that we could find about his early years, but I'd wager that he was kind of raised in like a religious family and a religious community.
That
Because
like to spread seed.
yeah, actually, I would say that that's fair. And he actually followed a very weird type of like Christian naturalism that we're not going to get into a whole lot in this episode, but it is kind of an interesting story. But in his early life, he began working on a nearby farm as a horticulturalist. And more specifically, he helped maintain apple orchards until around the age of 18, where, according to some, he persuaded his brother of 11 years old to head out west, and this was in 1792, and this was presumably to plant trees. During this time, his father, Nathaniel, bought a farm in Ohio, and the duo met their father out there in 1805. Johnny brought with him apple seeds that he had been collecting from cider presses in Pennsylvania. And in the beginning, rather than tossing around apple seeds as he went, he was actually planting nurseries, and he did this very specifically because he was equal parts like a naturalist and businessman. And he kind of had an interesting way of like spreading what he was doing. So it seems that he would like plant a nursery, build a fence around it, and then hire a neighbor to kind of run the storefront. And the storefront was selling trees and selling apples and stuff like that. And their neighbor would get a share of each sale made. And Chapman would return, quote, every year or two to work on the nursery to help keep solvent. And so History.com has an interesting excerpt about him that we're going to quote here. Quote,
He doesn't sound like a naturalist so much as a business baron.
Though his legend may paint a picture of Johnny Appleseed planting at random and selflessly handing out seeds to needy settlers, in reality, Chapman's path followed a strategic business plan. Children's books about Appleseed have, of course, removed the element of alcohol from the story, but Chapman's success was centered around not around fresh apples, but rather the cider they could create. Cider was an essential at the American dinner table, so most homes had their own small orchard. Chapman planted orchards along the pioneers' routes, staying ahead of other orchardist competition, since his nomadic, unmarried lifestyle allowed him to cover more ground. He would then trade his seedlings with new settlers in the area so that they could grow apples for their new homes. And although he was a very serious businessman, he did show acts of kindness in which earned him his nickname. If he found a pioneer struggling, he would do what it took to help that person.
Hey, you want to buy some apple trees? Well, I'm struggling. I got a plan for you. You got some land? I got apple trees. Maybe we can work something out.
Yeah,
Well,
I was thinking.
So
Almost,
yeah, that's cool. Like help somebody up.
I was almost
trees was another way of as a pioneer to claim plots of land too. So this was very important.
I was almost
thinking.
I guess
They're not buying the land; they're fucking staking claim on it.
I was almost thinking more like like a real estate value and stuff, where it's like, oh, you like this house? What about this one with a small apple tree? It's got apple trees and stuff. Or vice versa. You want to buy this land and it's just barren and stuff. Or you want to buy this land with lush apple trees and that. And so there's this incentive to want to buy a house or a piece of land to build a house on because it has apple trees on it. Like it's growing and producing something that's of some value.
I think you might, and I think a lot of people might be thinking about this from the wrong political landscape or whatever. This was westward movement, expansionism. There was no land for sale. You paid a quarter to the U.S. government, and you could go and stake your claim anywhere west of the Mississippi or whatever. This guy was going basically finding places where there was a group of people making a little community somewhere. All the rest of the land's free. He's going in and he's like, I'm going to fence off and plant an orchard here. And then I'm going to go to these people and be like, hey, you work this orchard. And I get something from that. You know what I mean? So he's setting up these little orchard franchises.
Yeah, I got you.
And he's just staying ahead of his competition.
And again, this is early enough where his competition
on his own.
Well, and again,
but I get the orchard rights.
And this is early enough where his competition,
he owns it because he fenced it in.
Yeah.
He staked that claim.
Well, and again, trees were a way to stake a claim as well in order to delineate your boundary. But also, again, he's getting out in Pennsylvania and Ohio. He's not going fucking westward. He's not going super far west. And there's not enough detail about his early life, but I think that he did make it out a little westward, towards the Mississippi.
What year was this?
He was born in the 1700s. In 1792, he and his brother left
1800s
to go
1792.
Yeah.
So not quite 16 years after the American Revolution.
Yeah. So there's not much going out west, but this is the
there is
early
still
part of that.
westwardly expansion, right?
Exactly.
Out to Ohio and stuff. That was the new frontier.
I mean,
And
you're
if you
hitting
think
the
about it,
Mississippi
you gotta-
more or less. East of the Mississippi is Ohio.
You've driven through Pennsylvania, yes?
No.
No?
Yes, a little
You
bit.
did. You drove to Philadelphia, didn't you say
Well, I took the train. I didn't drive, but
that? Okay.
yes.
But the train, and you took it from the west? Where'd you take the train from?
No, I just took it on the East Coast south.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
so when you drive across Pennsylvania on either this I-70 or I-80, there's this part of Pennsylvania you cross called the Wilds. And on the 70, it's 2.5 hours of nothing. In Pennsylvania, which is considered East Coast and stuff, that's on a highway you can do 85 miles an hour. It's 2.5 hours at 75. That's weeks of travel on horseback. It's huge distances for being pedestrian, right? And we forget about that.
Yeah, for
That
sure.
going out to Ohio in 1792
Oh, that's a trek. Like,
That's crazy.
was uncharted territory. There be monsters. There be giants. It's off the map.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Some explorers, Lewis and Clark, those guys. Some people had done this already.
the new
We
land,
knew
yeah.
that there was the West Coast.
Well, and
We'd
that's why-
circumnavigated around the Horn of South America, but still, to be the guy that could stay ahead of, I'll bring it back, to be the guy that could stay ahead of the other businesses that produce these things, stake claim by planting orchard, community effort that garners them something.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and again, what I want to note is that all this is happening to a fruit that doesn't know that the creature that used to eat it whole doesn't exist anymore.
Or does it? I mean,
does
we're
it?
assuming because
Yeah.
it's a tree, it doesn't have like self-aware cognitive history.
Yeah, but it's a very
stuff.
interesting story because like all this is happening because of these fucking trees, man. Like these fucking apple trees. Like it's so cool.
Apple trees consistently produce this super reliable harvest in pretty cold fucking climates, whereas like citrus and other fruit trees do not. Kiwis don't
Yeah.
grow in New England.
Yeah, and so like some tales about Johnny Appleseed, they seem interesting and based in fact. Like the time that he saw, so this I thought was really interesting. Like the time that he saw a missionary exhorting a congregation in Mansfield, Ohio. So he was just chastising them. And the preacher was very severe and the sermon was very long as the preacher was chastising them for such indulgences as imported tea and calico, which is an unbleached, like kind of a barely processed cotton cloth. So when the preacher reached his climax, he's alleged to have said, "Where now is there a man who, like the primitive Christians, is traveling to heaven barefooted and clad in coarse raiment, in coarse clothes?" He asked this question over and over, repeating himself to his audience. He did this for so long that Johnny Appleseed, apparently, having lost his endurance and his patience, approached the preacher, put his bare foot upon the stump, and upon the stump the preacher used as a podium and declared, "Here's your primitive Christian." The preacher responded immediately by dismissing the congregation. And so one thing that's very interesting about Johnny Appleseed.
This just sounds like this is like man, this is classic 1812 fucking corporate promotional advertising, dude. Like case in point.
Well, and the interesting thing about Johnny Appleseed is that he actually walked around in a potato sack that had 3 holes cut in it, 1 for his head and 2 for his arms. And then he basically walked around with a pot or what's called a tin hat, something to that effect. And so he carried around like a thing to cook like food in, and then wore it as a hat as he was like throwing out all these apple seeds. And then he walked around basically barefoot. And so it's funny to think about this guy with this pan on his head wearing a fucking sack cloth, walking up and being like, "Boom, I'm your primitive Christian," and just throws apple seeds at the
This
preacher.
all sounds now that I see that he was just purely a businessman. Now that I've learned the lore, the myth, the mythos
A
is
kooky
shattered.
businessman.
He's just like, no, yeah, exactly. He's some driven, type A, fucking smooth talking.
I'd
guy.
like to sell elixir, but all I can find is these apple seeds.
No, but he recognized the landscape and he
also-
had that whatever that drive is that makes people successful. I bet he turned out to be a pretty successful guy. That's why we still to this fucking day talk about Johnny Appleseed.
Yeah, John Chapman.
John Appleseed Chapman.
So being that he
Yeah.
also preached as he traveled, he allegedly converted many Native Americans to Christianity. It is widely held that Johnny had a great respect for the natives, which was a mutual feeling between the two.
I'm sure there's some double entendre with the apple, the Garden of Eden, and the conversion of people to Christianity right there.
You could put something in there, yeah. In fact, the natives even saw him as having been, quote, touched by the Great Spirit. And he was also so well loved that even hostile tribes left him alone. There was like an agreement that people would just leave the guy with the pan on his head alone.
Well, okay, so
Yeah.
the dude that shows up in a sack, right? Especially for Native Americans who are so used to like Europeans in their like disgustingly dirty, weird clothes, like foul, like month-old shirt,
And, like,
2-month-old shirt,
And they seem to be wearing a lot of them.
and then here's this fucking weird ass dude in a sack, barefoot.
With a bottle
Drunk
on
as
his
With
fuck
a-
on cider, I presume.
Yeah, I gotta think.
Coming into town, you
know-
guys like apples?
Well, no, more like a Winston Churchill kind of like functioner. Like he's clearly a functioning alcoholic.
Yeah,
in
yeah.
this scenario.
Clearly.
Yeah.
And they're like he just must be such a non-threat. You know what I mean? Like if you're super warrior kind of society, there's no honor in killing this dude. He's not a warrior.
And something interesting.
You know what I
to
mean?
note
Like
about
he's
that-
just a guy.
He was such a naturalist, actually, that there's a couple stories written by his friends that describe him as at one point he's either telling the story or they witness this, but he's sitting by a campfire and notices a mosquito fall into the fire, and because he believes so wholeheartedly in not doing harm to any other living being, he immediately extinguishes his fire and says, "The comfort of my own shouldn't be the detriment of others."
including mosquitoes.
So he is like
So he's
this
a
naturalist.
Ultra pacifist naturalist.
Yeah.
Right.
He's pretty cool.
His friends must have hated him. They're like, dude, why'd you put out the fire? He's like, 'cause the mosquito. And they're like, dude, seriously. It's cold.
We are in Ohio.
We're in Ohio.
Put on another sack, brother.
Yeah.
So Johnny grew apples and apple trees, and all that has been documented. However, it seems parts of his stories have been embellished. For instance, I did find this story where it's rumored that he basically wrote an ice block down the Allegheny River, but it's probably more of an exaggeration than anything. There's no proof of it. Nobody can like it's
Down the Allegheny River.
Allegheny River, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I'm saying that. Is that what you said?
Yeah, Allegheny.
Allegheny River.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of his story
Again,
that's
Pennsylvania. My mom lives really close to the
been,
Allegheny
yeah,
River.
and so again, a lot of his story has been kind of embellished, and it seems that there's a lot of stuff that people kind of get wrong when they talk about Johnny Appleseed. But he is kind of an interesting story and an interesting, especially when we talk about the history of apples in regards to like the New World. He's kind of like a pivotal moment because he's only planting cider apples at the moment, which are being localized, and then people in those localizations are picking the sweeter ones and breeding those and creating sweeter apples and bigger. And so things are changing drastically throughout the world. for
Some
all
people
these
like
apples.
to smoke cigarettes. Some people like to dip chew.
Right. For
It's
a
like-
long time, I think the only thing an apple was really good for was cooking or fermenting process.
Yep.
And because like you said earlier, like you can't take the seed from a Macintosh apple, plant it, and get a Macintosh. No, you're gonna get a spitter.
Yep.
99 times out of 100. And every once in a while, you'll get an apple tree. When you're planting
It's the old
hundreds of thousands of apple trees, in those hundreds of thousands, you find
yeah.
a Macintosh.
It's the old clones
and
versus
you look,
seed
you walk,
things
can you
and
imagine that person like,
phenoms and-
look at those apples. They look they're like way different from these ones that are like splotchy red and green. This one's all just like all red and like really plump, or you know what I mean? Like
and it tastes good. That's
you
on
bit
like,
into it and you're like, shit, you can eat this.
This is great.
Loren, try this.
Oh my god.
And you're like, shut up, dude. I'm not that dumb. I'm like, no, do it. And you're like eating one yourself. Yeah.
Well, we're going to go a little bit away from Johnny Appleseed, and we're going to backtrack just a little bit. Because
To the time warp.
the story of apples has this very long and windy road, and apples have had quite the impact on human society, as we've seen. So, like, one thing I want to emphasize is I started the story thinking that apples were kind of boring. And the more we kind of got into it, the more I was like, shit, they've been everywhere. They've been literally like a linchpin to so many different fucking things in society. And
It's a core agricultural product.
Wah.
yeah, it really is. And so, in
What was the
Core.
apple core, baby.
Core.
But perhaps no other apples were as important to modern society as the ones that grew in Woolsthorpe Manor. He was the son of a farmer and was born in Grantham, England in 1642. At 19, he entered into Cambridge University, but had to leave due to the outbreak of the bubonic plague. This is where Sir Isaac Newton would actually discover an interesting idea.
Yes.
The story goes that he was sitting or napping under an apple tree when an apple fell and hit him on the head. In actuality, there's no evidence for this story, but it doesn't mean it didn't happen. But what we know did happen was, after having gone back to Woolsthorpe Manor, he spent his time in his orchard where he watched an apple fall and basically thought to himself, why do these always fall straight down? Like, they don't fall like angularly, they don't fall upwards or sideways. What is this all about? So I'm going to let History.com tell this part of the story. Quote, in 1687, Newton published this principle, which states that every body in the universe is attracted to every other body with a force that is directly proportional to the product of their masses and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them. In this landmark work, Principia, which also features his 3 laws of motion. So in 1762, Newton shared this apple anecdote with a William Stukeley, who included it in a biography, quote, the memoirs of Sir Isaac Newton's life, published in 1752. According to Stukeley, painfully said it, quote, after dinner, the weather being warm, we went into the garden and drank tea under the shade of some apple trees. He told me just in the same situation as when formerly the notion of gravitation came to his mind, occasioned by the fall of an apple as he sat in a contemplative mood. End quote. So the esteemed mathematician and physicist died in 1727 and was buried in Westminster Abbey. His famous apple tree continues to grow at Woolsthorpe Manor. So that's pretty cool. Woolsthorpe. British things are just the worst.
Newton's apple tree is still living.
Indeed. Yeah. Well,
That's pretty cool.
According to this article, history.com.
It's a hardy apple tree.
Yeah.
Apple trees will live for like 400, 500 years, no problem. They're just not going to produce really great apples unless you keep very good care of them.
And so the next thing I want to address in the history of apples is, does an apple a day keep the doctor away? Well, it seems by the phrase that phrase was started by Big Apple. I'm actually just kidding. But it did come from
New York City?
You get your
The
apples.
Big Apple?
You get your apples from New York City.
But it did come from another.
Most of the world did for a long time.
So an apple a day keeping the doctor away. That actually comes from another very British place called Pembrokeshire, and it's a Pembrokeshire proverb. In 1886, it read, "quote eat an apple on going to bed, and you'll keep the doctor from earning his bread."
Wow.
Yeah.
Starve your doctor. Eat
Starve your
apples.
Well, and I like that people even back in the day made bread, dude. Like, get up and make bread. So cool. So cool. Healthline.com wanted to know whether or not there was anything of merit to these claims, and so they researched. Having their findings indicated that apples are, quote, associated with a number of benefits that could help promote long-term health. Healthline also notes that apples are, quote, highly nutritious and are loaded with important nutrients, including fiber, vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants.
I feel like this is the same thing that Cheerios did. Healthy heart starts with Cheerios.
Yeah, except Cheerios haven't been around for 8 to 11
No, I
million years.
get that, but I'm just like, I feel like Cheerios, it's just like, yo, you know what the apples did? They were like, yo, promote the Dr. Health thing.
Well, think about it. It makes sense that an apple, like other things that we have been eating for a very fucking long time, things that have evolved alongside us. We and the apple have evolved together, same as humans and horses and humans and dogs and humans and wheat.
It's like the original Subway ad.
What?
Oh, that one's lost on me too.
Like, eat Subway and you're healthier. The guy that did all the Subway ads where it was like...
Jared,
yeah.
I walked to Subway and ate a $5 foot long
Yeah,
and I
and it's
lost
like,
weight.
I lost all this weight. They're like, eat an apple a day and you'll be good.
But he always walked to Subway. That was the thing. Like, he always admitted to walking before eating.
Another quote from a headline goes, quote, one medium apple, which is around 100 grams, provides the following nutrients: 95 calories, 25 grams of carbs, 4.5 grams of fiber, 9% of the daily value of vitamin C, 5% daily value of copper, 4% daily value of potassium, and 3% of the daily value of vitamin K.
So
However,
bad.
they're cited for...
Copper something you're supposed to eat a bunch of?
A little bit.
However, their cited sources for this information come from a now defunct USDA website address. So I went ahead and I decided to go ahead and find if we could validate any of this kind of information.
It really is Big Apple.
Yeah, it's Big Apple, baby. And so Live Science shows that these are more or less accurate numbers. An 8-ounce apple, which is a little bit bigger than the one cited by Healthline, it has about 5 grams of dietary fiber, 260 milligrams of potassium, 8% vitamin C. It's got calcium, iron, sugars. But the health benefits may not just be in their nutrient content. And so apples are really cool, but there's some kind of special things about them.
Because of how you have to chew them?
Arsenic.
It's actually, yes, exactly, because of how you have to chew them.
Right.
Interesting. So the Live Science article...
Chewing is really healthy. Like, chewing your food a bunch is really healthy. It's hard to swallow like a big chunk of an apple. Yeah. You have to chew the shit out of it.
I was being sarcastic about that, but I definitely agree about that. You having to chew.
I was like, I'm kind of excited I was right. You're a piece of shit, Loren. You're a piece of shit. You couldn't see that. I threw something at him.
I win the podcast.
To the listeners, I threw something at him.
Hurt. What was that? Paper?
Paper. It was paper.
So the Live Science article cites a nutritionist from San Diego, Laura Flores, who states, quote, apples are high in polyphenols, which function as antioxidants. These polyphenols are found in the skin of the apples as well as the meat. So to get the greatest amount of benefits, eat the skin of the apple, end quote. This can help slow down free radical oxides inside the body, which are thought to be a contributing factor to cancer risks. Apples and their polyphenols may be able to help us with things like, quote, asthma and Alzheimer's disease while assisting with weight management, bone health, pulmonary function, and gastrointestinal protection. So apples have these complex nutrients that help us with a variety of things. But do they really help keep the doctor away? Daniel Pendick, great name, writing for Harvard Medical Schools, sat down to read a report with the title, quote, association between apple consumption and physician's visits, appealing to the conventional wisdom that an apple a day keeps the doctors away. That appeared in an edition of JAMA Internal Medicine. Quote, the report was published in the journal's inaugural April Fool's Day issue by a pack of parodists from the Dartmouth College, the University of Michigan School of Nursing, and the Veteran Affairs Medical Center in White River. It is based upon actual national nutritional data collected from nearly 8,400 men and women.
Did you say national?
National. From 8,400 men and women, 753 of whom ate an apple a day and follows rigorous study methods. So this was a prank that they did as an actual scientific study. Disappointingly, the study concludes, quote, evidence does not support an apple a day keeps the doctor away. However, a small fraction of U.S. adults who eat an apple a day do appear to use fewer prescription medications.
I don't eat. I definitely don't eat an apple a day.
But the prescription drugs you take in are...
None.
Okay.
That's what I mean. And I can't remember the last time I went to a doctor. So like,
And what kind
I
of doctor
don't eat-
prescribes beer?
Oh, the bartender.
There you go.
Yeah,
Doctor bartender.
doctor bartender. Give me a beer. Don't do it. Give me a beer. Don't do it. Give me a beer. Get him a beer.
Sam, continue your thought.
Okay, so but I don't go to a doctor. I don't eat apples, and what was the other one? No prescription drugs.
Yeah.
So
So you're doing real good.
I'm just saying, and not like where's the proof there, huh, buddy?
I don't know. Big Apple, baby.
Big
So
Apple.
after having read the report, he was curious as to what his colleagues at Harvard might think. So he asked a registered dietitian, Kathy McManus, who is the director of the Department of Nutrition of Harvard-affiliated Brigham and Women's Hospital. She notes
That is a lot of title.
it's a big title. She notes that while she doesn't eat an apple a day, she enjoys them frequently and enjoys them for their convenience. Quote, they are an easy-to-go snack. Since apples are about 85% water by weight, they can fill you up without a lot of calories. And so there's ways for us humans to actually boost the nutritional benefits by adding things to our apple-y diets. Again, quoting her, quote, I often encourage my patients to combine a healthy carb with a healthy fat and protein by spreading peanut butter on an apple. Low-fat cheese also goes well with the apple. Apples are great in salads and salsas too, end quote.
I mean, have you ever had like an apple roasted with like meat in a pan? It's delicious there.
We're
as
actually
well.
about to get into that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
like
mean,
the old.
apple with peanut butter is delicious.
I'm just saying, apples literally don't have a thing they don't go with.
I would highly agree with
Yeah.
that. Like,
Yeah.
Did you have a food you were trying to eat? Did you ever consider
Add
just
apples?
adding a little slice? Sometimes I cut up apples like onions, like you slice an onion.
oh yeah.
And then just add it to whatever sandwich I was making. It really doesn't matter. It could be a hot fucking pastrami sandwich with onion and cheese. Apple, you know what I mean? Does everybody feel that when I said it? You were like, oh yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah.
A hot fucking pastrami.
You know, I was just thinking like the thing
maybe
that
just a hot pastrami sandwich. Sorry, my big apple's showing.
I mean, I just heard the passion in your.
put them on a Philly
pastrami.
cheesesteak, bro.
Seriously,
So-
that sounds good.
Throughout the world, we found perhaps thousands of ways to prepare and eat apples, and many places throughout the world have their own recipes for tasty apple meals. So we're about to get into some foreign
I love that
foods
this
here,
also
baby.
became a food network.
For instance, in Argentina, apple empanadas are little handheld pastries either filled with savory foods like meats or with sweet foods like apples. You may have also eaten the Austrian Apfelchen, which are little pastries that are similar to like apple turnovers. In Belarus, they have baked honey apples. Britain enjoys apple and cheese scones, which sounds fucking horrible. Whereas China
Apple
enjoys
and cheese scone doesn't sound horrible. What are you on drugs?
I mean,
Sounds goddamn
I
delicious.
guess
too.
it depends on the cheese, though.
But cheese doesn't go with apple.
American.
Actually never.
not
I've
true.
never run a scientific
American's
experiment
not
on
cheap.
that, so I don't have any information about that. But in like China, they enjoy apple and pork rib soup. The French eat tarte tatin, which is a sticky sweet dessert, and torte, which is a hybridization of pie and cake. And I thought that was really weird, is that the French made a hybridization of pie and cake. It looks really
Cake.
good, but
I'm not going to say it's weird and I want to try it.
obviously Germany, you know, they've made apple strudels and apple sauerkraut, which is actually really cool. And it's just shaved bits of sweet apple and fermenting cabbage, usually for like a seasonal condiment. And I would imagine it tastes great
What?
because of the stark contrast between like the sharp and tangy,
Yeah.
like pickled
It's like a
cabbage
pickled
and that sweet apple.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to try that.
Right.
Baby, it gets me going. And Hungary likes braised red cabbage and apples. Iceland likes fish soup with apples, while the Japanese have made chicken apple curry. The Swiss eat rotzi with apple, and the rotzi is made from like small grated potatoes cooked into like little hash browns. have like apples on it and stuff like that.
Right.
Sounds pretty good.
It's like or potato latke with applesauce.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna
Or
say
pork with applesauce.
I was gonna say
Or
similarly.
like pork chop with applesauce.
Yeah, me and my
Or a
girl recently
waffle
made latkes.
with applesauce.
Right.
Yeah, we made like some latkes a couple months ago, and so I wanted to include that in the show, and like they're basically
As
the
we
same.
are approaching the Festival of Lights.
Yeah, but like the grated potatoes in latkes, they have eggs and flour and like herbs and spices in them, so that makes them a little different from the rosti made in Switzerland, and it kind of sounds gross to other people, but like I've eaten it with applesauce and it's got sour cream on top of it, and
Nope.
it
It's
is
banging.
good.
Applesauce and sour cream. Same
It
as
is
like applesauce and like a sour cheese.
Delicious. And honestly, when my girlfriend offered it to me, I was like, I don't know about that, but I'm open, want to explore new things. And it was fucking tits. It was great. And so before we go, I'd like to cover one more thing. Apple pie is not American. As we've noted, Kazakhstan is where apples have come from, which is nearly all the way across the planet from the United States. However, during the
It is about as far as you can go.
It
You
kind
know
of
what I
is.
mean?
It
Like,
almost is. And so during the days of like Johnny Appleseed, there was many different cultivars in the U.S. and the cross pollination happened incidentally and accidentally. The reason we've associated apples with America is because we quite literally made them into our own in the United States. Johnny's apples were bitter and mostly for cider, but as they grew and their genetic diversity expanded, many new cultivars came to be. And so you can actually
enough
say
apples.
these apples are
Don't get
American
lemons.
apples. In addition to apples like not being American, though, the first recorded recipe for apple pie was written in 1381 in England. The recipe called for, quote, figs, raisin, pears, and saffron. So,
I didn't hear apples in there.
you didn't,
Right.
did you?
That's a fig. That sounds like fucking fruitcake, dude.
Well, I think
Did you just try and say
I think the
apple
apples
pie
is
fruitcake?
implied.
Oh.
Yeah. You obviously include apples, but you include all these other things because it's
Oh,
not
okay,
real
okay.
apple pie.
Almost like mincemeat, but with
It's
with
apple-
apples instead of actual
Yeah.
whatever the mincemeat thing is
So
made
in
from.
addition to apples,
Raisins. Ugh.
so why is apple pie so American? And in order to answer that, we're actually going to cite Emily Upton, who wrote for Today I Found Out. And we're going to quote from an article in which she appears in this Smithsonian magazine. Quote, the actual genesis of the expression is harder to track, Upton writes. In 1902, a newspaper article wrote that no pie-eating people can be permanently vanquished. A 1924 advertisement appearing in the Gettysburg Times promotes the new lest suits that are as American as apple pie. And by World War II, Upton writes, the association was cemented. American soldiers would tell journalists that they were fighting for mom and apple pie. Upton writes, giving rise to the expression as American as mom and apple pie.
That's so insane. Think about that. Think about that shit. We took two of the most
Go
most
ahead.
ubiquitous, one singular, like every
You guys
animal.
can't see what Sam's brain is breaking.
It is, dude. I got it's like cross wires are firing. Fuck you. Mom. That it's like is America. No, that's everybody. Everything has a fucking mom. You can't say that's
But American
yours.
moms make
No, but
apple
apples are
pie.
American, remember?
and then apples like
American-
the third most prolific.
American moms
fourth
put
most
apple
prolific
pies out
fucking
on the windowsill. They get stolen.
Sill.
Sam.
They get stolen. And that's American. As American as a mom making an apple pie.
I get stolen on a windowsill. Mm-hmm. So,
Window seals are so cute, but it's weird because you think you want to put them in the ocean.
You want to beat them with a club.
Wow.
it's weird that they write
wear them on your
Jesus
hands like
Christ.
I know.
So how do you
Various states Yeah, that's what we're doing.
So how do you guys feel about apples? Is there
This
anything that
podcast
you
we're
think I
screwing.
missed? What are you thinking?
Oh,
Sean?
I mean, with
I
a
said
topic. Oh,
I'm wondering how you store all these apples. Get out of here.
I'll just go.
Close the room. Lock the doors.
No, yeah, it is interesting. The idea of storing apples. One thing I discovered was that
I'm wondering who's gonna cut who first, considering that Sam came from the Big Apple and I come from the capital Apple.
What was that?
I want to try that again. And I come from the apple capital of the world.
Yeah, I honestly don't know, and I think you're kind of segueing into something that's going to be interesting because next week we are doing a little bit about food storage, if I'm not mistaken.
Cold storage.
Cold storage. Yeah, so that'll be
Industrial cold storage with a focus on industrial cold storage.
yeah, so that'll be interesting.
But a deep dive into the history of window seal
window seals.
clubbing and
So Sam, how do you feel about apples?
well, seeing as how I spent a lot of time growing up in the Big Apple, you
Hate
know, apples are a core part of my who I am.
Sean-
No, I mean I love apples. They
Sean
do
drives
have a
knife.
nostalgic. I didn't hear what he said.
I didn't either.
They have a nostalgic element to me. I will forever enjoy the act of picking an apple.
So finally, the
Yeah,
most
yeah, for
controversial
sure.
thing,
Right.
the most controversial thing that we're going to get to tonight.
Like you and almonds.
What is the best kind of apple?
Oh, that's easy.
Is it
Yeah.
Sean?
I want to
Actually,
hear.
no,
I
wait.
want to hear what. No, I want to hear what Sean's got to
Okay,
say
all
because
right.
he's actually got a lot of. You,
And he's got a
can't see,
smirk.
He's
He's got
got
a
a lot of
smirk.
fucking goddamn motherfucking ego.
Sean?
Hold on.
I feel like we should
Hey,
like.
shut up. Let me start up. He's got a lot of motherfucking goddamn ego about apples, and I don't really appreciate it.
All right,
Yeah, I
so
got it
Sean,
off. I got it off.
Sean, what?
I feel like Sam and me should like the Rochambeau, like 1, 2, 3, say the favorite apple
No, I think you
at
should
the
say your favorite
at the
apple
same
first.
time.
Why would you Rochambeau if you're going to say it at the same
No,
time?
I
like
just
1, 2,
mean
3,
like
what's your
1, 2,
favorite
3, and like we both just say
All
favorite
right, are
apple.
you guys ready with your favorite apples then?
Yeah.
All right, 1, 2, 3.
Empire.
Granny.
Wow.
Whatever, dude. Loser.
I can't believe you guys don't know that
Loser.
Fuji's are the most superior apples.
Fuji
Oh
apples.
yeah,
Fuji
Fuji apples. Watch us
outta
both
here.
just
You guys
beat you up.
You want to get jumped?
Do you want to get jumped?
Dude,
I like that
clearly
sour apple
Empire.
shit, dog.
You want an American
Empire.
apple pie?
Oh, you want a Fuji apple? Those are Japanese, dude.
Yeah,
Yeah.
We
I don't-
won that war.
Anyway,
we ship apples to them.
I don't know about you guys, but I actually feel very informed having learned a little bit about apples tonight. And if you guys at home have felt anything inside of you, please feel free to leave a comment.
Disgust.
Let us know what you feel about apples, and let us know if
drop a
you're a
comment,
fan of
leave a
spitters
like.
or not. Leave a comment or anyway, we've trashed this ending, guys. Thank you guys for listening at home.
Yeah.
I hope you guys have been having a good time because I certainly did. This is going to be the end of the episode, but we will be back
Cheers.
next week. Cheers, boys. We will be back with cold storage and what's that all about? So we'll talk to you more then. And till then, be safe and take care of each other. Good night.
Huzzah. I was trying something new.
This episode of Black Sheep and Bad Apples was brought to you in part by Fourth Corner Music. Fourth Corner, where we support apples from the Big Apple to the West Coast apple. Thank you for listening.
Turn it off. Just turn it off.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.